was interesting. They did it at a Beth Din in New York, but he got a call from, I don't know if you know, well, sure many of you know Rabbi Vigler from Johannesburg, or Rabbi Simchani Shlomo from Bloberg.
Sure, yeah.
Their son slash brother, Rabbi Yossi Vigler, an aspiring Dayan in New York, and he said, "Can I come? I'd like to come watch the Chalitza." Brother Yossi told me how it was very emotionally wrenching, because the members of the Beth Din will ask you, they will almost, I don't want to say interrogate you, but are you, and as you saw, do you not want to keep up the home of your brother? You have to refuse. And you go through the whole thing. So he came to watch it because it's not a very common, episode. But it does happen. These halachas are practical. It's not just theoretical. So today's Rambam is going to. You're just hold 1 second. I just want to close the door. Sorry. So today's Rambam is going to talk not about Chalitza. Well, we'll talk about Chalitza later, but the first few halachas talk about an actual mitzvah of Yibum. Now, what's interesting to note about Yibum is that Yibum is a mitzvah de'erais. It's a biblical mitzvah, and that is that he takes the woman into his sister-in-law into his home as a wife. She accepts it, and they continue, in a certain sense, the marriage. Now, if you remember, at the beginning of the laws of marriage, we learned that in the olden days, marriage was a man and a woman, a consenting adult couple, coming together as husband and wife. And that King David instituted that by Torah law, that's not allowed. You have to first have a marriage ceremony. But here, they can just live together, and by living together, they're married. And nevertheless, our sages instituted that we should not do that, that they should, in fact, have a proper marriage ceremony. But that marriage ceremony cannot supersede the reality that they can still be husband and wife just by living together. So let's take a look inside. Hilchos Yibum b'Chalitza, Perek Beis, Aleph. Midivrei Seifrim, it is a rabbinic ordinance that a Yavam should not enter into marital relations with his Yivama until he consecrates her in the presence of two witnesses with a pruta, an article worth a pruta. The act is called a ma'amar. Different explanations as to what the word ma'amar means, either a statement or a transition. But a maimer does not complete the acquisition of a yavama, as will be explained. In other words, it's different to a regular marriage. When a yavam performs a maimer with his yavama without her knowledge, his deed is of no consequence. For a woman can be consecrated only willingly. There's no such thing as marrying anyone against their will. When a minor is widowed after being merely consecrated, in other words, her marriage was never consummated, a maimer can be performed only with the consent of her father, again, continuing the principle of the marriage of a child, not something which is permitted by halacha today.
Rabbi, may I ask, what is the pruta? Is that a sacred item?
No, sorry. I should have explained that. We had that in the laws of marriage. A pruta is an item of minimal value. Okay, I think it's about 7 rand is the value today of a pruta. When a man marries a woman, he needs to give her an object of value when he marries her bekesef. Now, what's funny is that today husband and wife, they go to the jeweler and they find this beautiful, perfect, smooth, golden wedding band. I don't know what it costs them, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 rand. And then when you come under the chuppah, the rabbi will ask the witnesses, is this worth a shava pruta? Is this worth basically 7 rand? A pruta is almost like the smallest item of value. So it can be anything. Technically, you can marry your wife with a spoon that you get from the kitchen drawer. Okay, so just as the Yavam was consecrated as Yavama, so too he should recite the marriage blessings in the presence of 10 men and compose a ksuba as is required of any man who marries a woman. When a Yavam enters into marital relations with his Yavama without previously performing a mimer with her, he acquires her in a binding manner. In other words, if they go into a secluded room and are intimate with each other as a husband and wife, they're, in other words, as a man or woman, they have sexual relations, he doesn't have to consecrate her after engaging in marital relations with her. However, he should be given stripes for rebellious conducts and should write a ksiba for her. Stripes is malchus, basically a whipping for having married a woman without a proper marriage ceremony beforehand. Even though they're technically married, the way they went about it is forbidden today. When a Yavam engages marital relations with a Yavama, he acquires her as his wife. This applies regardless of whether he entered the relations unintentionally or with a licentious intent, under duress or willingly, meaning under duress of his own, not of her. Obviously, as you remember, we read very clearly, marital rape is prohibited. Whether he acted with a licentious intent and she acted unintentionally or under duress, or she acted with a licentious intent and he acted unintentionally or under duress, whether she was asleep, again, it's prohibited by Torah law, by rabbinic law, for a man to be intimate with his wife in her sleep. But if they did it, even though it's prohibited, if they did it, whether she was asleep or awake, whether he performed vaginal or anal intercourse, whether he inserted merely the head of his penis or the entire organ. Interesting to note, obviously, with anal intercourse, the whole idea of the marriage, which is to reproduce the seed of his brother, won't be possible. The woman won't fall pregnant by that. Nevertheless, it's a form of them uniting as husband and wife, and he can do it. Okay, the next halacha, if you can keep a straight face for it, all credit to you. Halacha Daled. When does the above apply? When the Yavam intends to perform a sexual act. If, however, he fell from the roof with an erection and accidentally, while falling, inserted his organ into his Yavama, had relations with her when he was so intoxicated that he wasn't conscious of anything, or when he was asleep, he does not acquire her as his wife. If he intended to masturbate in a hole in the wall and unintentionally inserted his organ into his Yavama, again, he does not acquire her as his wife. If he intended to sodomize an animal and unintentionally inserted his organ into his Yavama, he does acquire her as his wife. Yeah, strange as anything, but the Rambam does cover any possible scenario. Okay, now here, halacha hey says, what if they started to live together, but they didn't have sexual relations? So the principle that's relevant for the next few halachas is that we do not believe that a man and woman lived together for more than 30 days and had no sexual relations. Ultimately, by that time, they must have had a moment where their natural connection to one another would manifest itself in that. What if it's less than 30 days? So when a Yavam takes the Yavam at home to perform Yibum, within 30 days she claims they didn't engage in sexual relations. The Yavam claims they did engage in sexual relations and then divorces her. Since he already took the initiative and divorced her, we compel him to perform chalitza with her. In other words, we cover that base as well. If he didn't divorce her, we compel him to engage in relations with her. Or to perform chalitza and also to divorce her giving a get. In other words, if they never had relations, then they never got married and she's still the Yavam and he still has to do chalitza. If they did have relations, then they're a regular husband and wife and all they do is a get. So therefore we basically cover both her perspective and his perspective. If he divorced her after 30 days has passed and she claims they didn't engage in sexual relations, we request that he perform chalitza with her. If, however, he admits that he had not entered into relations with her, we then compel him to perform chalitza with her because she is still in the status of Yavam and he's still obligated to give her the chalitza. If she claims that they engage in sexual relations and he denies engaging in relations, she is not required to engage in chalitza, for his word is not accepted to cause her to be forbidden to all other men once he brings her to his home as his wife. In other words, once he's brought her into his home, he can no longer try to put her into the undesirable position of remaining as chalitza, as yavam. Okay, when a man dies childless and he survived with many brothers, the mitzvah is incumbent on the oldest brother to perform either yibum or chalitza. In other words, the oldest brother can perform chalitza as implied by Deuteronomy. The firstborn son whom she bears will perpetuate the name of the deceased brother. The oral tradition interprets the verse as referring to the eldest of the surviving brothers, causing the verse to be rendered, the eldest brother will perpetuate the name of the deceased brother. So when it says whom she bears, it's the mother of the brothers, not the Yavama. So the child that she bears that will perpetuate his name is the elder brother who's marrying. If the eldest brother does not desire to perform Yibum, all the other brothers are given that option. If they also do not desire, we then return to the eldest brother and tell him, the mitzvah is incumbent on you. Perform either Yibum or Chalitza, and we do not compel the Yavam to perform Yibum. We do, however, to compel him to perform Chalitza, meaning he has to do either one or the other. If the eldest brother says, give me a respite until a brother who is a minor attains majority, or until a brother who is on a journey returns, until a brother who has temporarily lost his powers of speech and hearing recovers, if he refuses, then I'll perform Yibum Chalitza. His request is not accepted. He is told the mitzvah is incumbent on you, perform either Yibum Chalitza, meaning there's no postponing, there's no delaying the process. Sadly, I saw a post today, from a friend who recently got divorced. He ended a 2-year-long divorce, and he said, if I have any advice to any of my friends who are going through this tragic and unfortunate situation, it is resolve it as quickly as possible. You will not gain anything from delaying it. The same is true, the Chachamim say, not only of divorce, but also of Yibum and Chalitza. Similarly, if the older brother is in another country, the obligation is transferred to his younger brother. The younger brother does not have the option of saying, the mitzvah is on my older brother, wait until he comes. Instead, we tell the brother that is at present, perform either Yibum or Chalitza. So my brother, I was living in South Africa, my brother Chazi was living in Australia. So my brother Yassi was the only brother in America at the time, so therefore they didn't have to consult with us. Halacha Yud. The laws pertaining to a Yavama who is fit to perform Yibum and refuses to do so the same as those governing a woman who rebels against her husband. In other words, where the Beth Din compels, so we compel her Yavam to perform Chalitza with her, and she forfeits the money due to her by virtue of her marriage contract. In other words, a Yavama, again, is not forced to accept it if she doesn't want the Chalitza, but then she will lose the money that the sages legislated for her to receive. Let me take the copy. The copy has to teach Torah. So either you sit on this side and let copy teach, or you can play somewhere else. Okay. When the deceased, where you want to sit, this side or that side? Okay, we need to stay there, not jumping back and forth. Okay. When the deceased is survived by many wives, the one that the Yavam asks to perform Yibum and refuses is considered to have rebelled. he should perform chalitza with her, and she forfeits the money due to her by virtue of her marriage contract. The other wives who were not asked to perform yibum receive the money due them by virtue of their marriage contracts as other widows do. If, however, the deceased will survive the many brothers, and the eldest brother states that he wants to perform yibum with one of the deceased wives, she is under obligation to him. So it's the older brother, and which wife is obligated to do it? He chooses, meaning any one of the wives is under obligation to perpetuate her husband's memory unless she doesn't want to, and then she can give up the ksuba. Even if she doesn't desire to marry him, but is willing to marry one of his brothers, her desire is not considered, for the mitzvah is that the oldest brother performs yibum. Good base. The following rules apply when the older brother says, I don't want to perform either yibum or chalitza. Behold, my brother is present. If one of the brothers asks her to perform yibum, and she doesn't desire to marry him, but she does desire to marry another brother, and he desires to marry her, she is not considered to have rebelled. Okay, so if you could almost call it a willing buyer, willing seller, and there's another brother who's ready to do it, and another wife who's ready to take the marriage, and they're okay. Once the eldest brother, from whom the mitzvah is incumbent, demurs, all the brothers are equal, and since she desires to marry one of the brothers, and he desires to marry her, she is not considered to have rebelled. Moreover, if one of the brothers was in another country, and the woman says, I prefer to wait for him to come and perform even with me. I don't want to marry this one. She is not, considered to have rebelled. Why? Since the brother who asks to marry her is not the eldest, we tell him, if you desire to perform chalitza and pay her the money due her by virtue of her marriage contract, you may. If not, she wants to wait until your brother comes. Since you do not have a prior claim, she's granted that prerogative. So again, we go with that principle. Okay, Yud Gimel. If the brother whom the Yavama desire to marry desired to marry returned and didn't desire to marry her, so he comes back, he says, no, I'm not interested. We turn again to the brother who desired to perform yibum, because it wasn't desired by the woman. We tell the woman, there's no one who desires to perform with you except this one, and the mitzvah of yibum is given priority. Either perform yibum with this one or leave without receiving the money due because of your marriage contract, as is the law with regard to all women who rebel. Okay, so a woman who decides, I'm out of here, I want to leave the marriage, she can. We'll force the husband to give her a get, right? But she won't get the money for the ksuba if she rebels. When I say she can, obviously it's not ideal. Whenever the law is that a woman should perform chalitza and not yibum, as we have mentioned, if she is entitled to receive the money due her by virtue of her marriage contract, she may collect that money in the same way as other widows. In other words, the same money that any widow would get, a woman of chalitza is allowed to get. Similarly, this is very interesting, if the yavam was a leper, or he has other blemishes for which men are required to divorce, as we learned in the laws of divorce, he must perform chalitza for her, and she is entitled to receive the money due her by virtue of her marriage contract. If a Yavama suffered blemishes while she was waiting for Yibum, it is a Yavam's lack of fortune. If he doesn't desire to perform Yibum, he must perform Chalitza and give her money due her by virtue of her marriage contract. So even though in theory they wouldn't have to stay married, that's fine, but he then will have to pay up. Tezvav. Yavama shenadra hanayim Yavama b'chayi baila. Shenadra hanayim b'kol Yehudim. Let's say a woman during her first husband's lifetime took a vow. She said, I am not going to have any benefits from any of my brothers-in-law or from any Jew. The Yavam should be compelled to, so obviously she can't marry him now. So he should be compelled to perform chalitza, and she's entitled to collect the money due by virtue of her marriage contract. she takes such a vow after her husband's death, though, we request her Yavam to perform Chalitza, but if he doesn't desire to do so, she is considered to have rebelled. Similarly, even if she took such a vow in her husband's lifetime, so let's say her husband is dying in the hospital, and she realized that her brother-in-law, she never quite liked him, she says, okay, I'm going to take a vow that I'm not having any Yana from him. If we realize that her intent was in order that he shouldn't perform Yibum, he is not compelled to perform Chalitza unless she accepts the status of one who rebels and forfeits payment of her marriage contract. In other words, she can get out of it, but then the special provisions that were made for her will no longer apply. Tezayim. No heed is paid to the words of a Yavama when her Yavama asks her to perform Chalitza. When a Yavam asks her to perform Chalitza, and she says, I don't want to perform Chalitza, nor do I want to collect the money of my marriage contract. I will remain in my husband's house like other widows. No. But she was given over to the Yavam from heaven, and the choice is his, whether to perform Yivum or perform Chalitza, and pay her the money due her by virtue of her marriage contract. Moreover, even if she says, I will provide for my own sustenance, by all means, I'll remain without a husband for the rest of my life, her words are not heeded. The Yavam will tell her, as long as you're under obligation to me, no one else will want to marry me. See, even if she says, I won't marry anyone else, but I don't want to do this whole. He can say to her, yes, you can keep yourself as an aguna, but I am also going to not be able to get married. Even if he is already married, this argument still holds weight, for it is possible for him to desire to marry another wife, or that his obligation to the Yavama will cause strife within his marriage, and so we force her to accept it. Yud Zayin. The following rules apply when a Yavama had no right to the privileges of marriage contract from a deceased husband because she was forbidden to him, but she is permitted to marry the Yavam, as will be explained in chapter 6. So, for example, there was an issue between her and her husband, which didn't apply to the Yavam. If the Yavam desires to perform Yibum, he may. He is not obligated to the woman for the privileges of her marriage contract, just as her previous husband was not. And the laws regarding the Yavam's obligation for the additional amount to be paid to the woman are the same as those that applied with regard to her husband. So she then will not get the money. If, however, a husband didn't write his wife a marriage contract, or she sold him or waived him the rights to her marriage contract, the Yavam is obligated to write a new marriage contract for her as it would be required for another widow. So if it was just circumstantial, then the new husband writes a ksuba. Yudches, before the Yavam performs Yibum or Chalitza with the Yavama, she is forbidden to marry another man. As Deuteronomy states, the wife of the deceased should not be allowed to marry an outsider. If she marries another person, if they engage in sexual relations, they are both punished by lashes, and he must divorce her with a get. This applies even if she has borne him several children. She is forbidden to him and to her Yavam. The Yavam should perform Chalitza with her, and this causes her to be permitted to marry other men. This is a very unfortunate situation where, but I should just point out, by the way, the children born from such a marriage are not mamzerim. In other words, it's forbidden, and they get biblical lashes. They've done something prohibited, but it's not as if they are 100% married, where the children will tragically be mamzerim. If she was consecrated by another man, she does not become forbidden to her Yavam. Instead, the man who consecrated her should divorce her. And a Yavam may perform either Yibum or Chalitza. Okay? So the new guy on the block came and was Mekadesh her. If you remember, in a Jewish marriage, there's Kiddushin and Nisuin. Kiddushin is where you just give the money and she becomes consecrated. If her Yavam was a priest who was forbidden to marry a divorcee, she should be divorced by the man who consecrated her so that the sinner should not benefit, and her Yavam should form Chalitza with her. She therefore cannot marry either one. If the man who consecrated the Yavama and then divorced her marries her after her Yavam performs Chalitza with her, they are not forced to separate. In other words, Chalitza is not considered a marriage process. What's the problem here? You may remember in the laws of divorce, when are a couple not allowed to remarry? Anybody remember? A husband and a wife that got divorced. It's a great thing to be machzik geshase, right? To remarry the woman you divorced. So obviously, if you're a kohen, you're not allowed to. But if the wife married someone else in the interim, here he says, if by contrast the man divorced the Yavama after being married to her and then remarried her again, the couple are forced to separate. This resembles the case of a married woman who thought that her husband died and remarried, who was forbidden to both her first and second husbands, has been explained. Yavama, who engages in licentious sexual relations, does not become forbidden to her Yavam. If he desires, he may perform Chalitza. If he desires, he may perform Yibum. In other words, again, in a marriage, if a woman has an affair, then if it's a kohen, she's not allowed to stay with her husband. But in a regular marriage, technically they would be allowed to. The same is true here. The following rules apply to any Yavama concerning whom there is a question according to rabbinic law, whether or not she is under obligation to a Yavam. Examples given: a Yavama bore a child who died within 30 days after a pregnancy that wasn't full term. In this instance, she is required by rabbinic law to perform Chalitza because of the doubt that exists whether the birth was viable, as explained above. And if such a woman was consecrated by another man before performing Chalitza, the Yavam should perform Chalitza with her, and she may remain married to her husband. Okay. If she was consecrated by a priest who is forbidden to be married to a woman or perform Chalitza, the Yavam should not perform Chalitza for her. And this leniency was instituted since we do not cause a man's wife to be forbidden because of a rabbinic decree instituted on account of doubt. If the priest divorces the woman or dies, she should perform Chalitza. Afterwards, she is then married b'chatchila to marry other men. Okay, so a kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who had Chalitza, but if this kohen now divorces her, she can then marry anyone. Any questions?
No, Rabbi.
Oh, good.
Nothing from my side.
Okay, have a beautiful Shabbos, everyone. Great to see you, always.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos.